700 people in this town then, right?
Well, it's a complicated book. I mean, I think so that might have made it more difficult for people who were in the industry to want to read it. And his previous books they were like pulp, in a way, and so people could read them quickly, and that's maybe what people expected and were disappointed. That instead they got something, of the genius that couldn't be understood at the time.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, I mean, I think Hawthorne was the most important. I mean, the whole group of writers that Emerson, the whole group of writers, everybody who was writing in that area of Massachusetts and also being published in this country. And it is interesting that Melville is mostly published in London and not in the U.S. Were always first published in London and not here.
Because his brother had a connection there, though,
Right,
right?
right,
Okay.
yeah. That this group of writers, I mean, Emerson is kind of difficult as well. I think maybe as deep a thinker, but certainly not as rhythmic a writer. Try reading, the essay on fate out loud, and you won't get any of this sort of beautiful mouthfeel. But the people in that particular group of writers, he probably was the guy who they talked about and said, like, poor Herman. Do you know? It didn't happen for him. But it did.
I had a comment back to the maybe woman. Can you hear me?
Yes, totally.
Thing. And when I read the book, I'm married to somebody who sailed on ships.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about the women who were left behind.
Right.
And what that's like. I also had an opportunity to work when my husband was stationed at the sub base in New London with a group of women whose husbands went out on those subs and they didn't hear from them for 6 months at a time. And it's it's hard. And those people on that ship, I mean, the people on the whaling ships, they had women. Maybe they weren't married to them, but they left women behind.
Mothers. They certainly had mothers.
Yeah.
And as we know, Ahab had a wife. Total drive-by sentence, which became a beautiful novel. So, but it is true. So, for example, there was something in the Sag Harbor Express maybe 2-3 weeks ago about this one Sag Harbor whaling captain who brought his wife on the boat, but I began with a B. Do you know?
I missed that article. I
Yeah.
look at it. I don't know.
But it didn't happen, and I think it is true that boats are often named after women and referred to as she, but women on boats were often thought to be very bad luck. So, so the people left behind, that they would have had an understanding going into that relationship that this guy was going to that kind of work. He was going to be gone for 3 years. He might not come back. That was the deal. If you fall in love with that kind of guy, that's what happens.
But it's still hard, even if you know it's the deal.
Totally.
But I think the women were tough.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the women in Sag Harbor or New Bedford or Nantucket, they had to run the household for a year. Or
Yeah, they did the taxes.
I had the point I want to make, but then it occurred to me to point out that the boat is usually...
Right, you said that, yeah.
Okay, great. But so the thing that we talked about the other night, and it struck me after multiple readings, and and then sort of imagining this conversation, if we back up from the gender question to the sort of diversity question, and how complicated it is these days sometimes to read books by great writers, because there are kind of perspectives within them that aren't inclusive in today's terms and so forth, is to read this book and, in my experience, I haven't seen very much that would disqualify it from a classroom, a contemporary classroom. Maybe I missed some things, but
there are a couple things that you skip over.
In a book that was written in the 1850s, during slavery, etc., that it seems less controversial than Huck Finn. to me.
It's actually
So-
easier to teach in that regard than
Yeah, I mean, in terms of,
absolutely.
and I think that's an amazing accomplishment if you think about it. It helps it to seem very contemporary. I don't know what in his mind, in Melville's mind, allowed him to write with so little kind of the contemporary prejudices expressed.
Well, and in fact, it's even more than that, because if you think about, the development of his relationship with Queequeg,
Right.
he starts out as the
Yeah.
guy who says, I don't want that that cannibal in my bed, and then they become best friends like in 2 days. And I do think that the world of New Bedford, Nantucket, and the ship, I don't know so much about the world of Sag Harbor, but probably the same, were worlds that were pretty integrated and open-minded. And when you came to these worlds, you were not,
You left
you left the world of the enslaved person behind. You left the world of the, but there are places in the book, particularly later in the book, there are just a couple of things that are surprising about, I can't, there's one man of color that is referred to in a not great way, and there's one kind of slightly anti-Semitic sentence and stuff. But so I don't know, as a teacher, I just notice those things and go on. But I think overall, this is actually a book about if you're good at your job, and a good person and have the right values. I don't care whether you're covered with tattoos.
Maybe some of that comes from the merchant marine experience and having lived on a ship with
Absolutely.
many different
Absolutely.
diverse people and gone to ports in that way.
Yeah, and making the decision that Queequeg will be a harpooner, like the fanciest job, that's not an officer's job on the boat. It takes great skill and intelligence and dexterity and courage to do that job. And Melville himself was a harpooner, but he didn't make the choice to make Ishmael a harpooner. He made the choice to make Queequeg, a guy from the islands covered head to toe with tattoos who worships a different god, be the strongest person on the, or in that class of ship person. You both read, and you too.
Just the other thing I wanted to say, in the half of the book that I read at that point,
Renee was a drop.
but I'm in the book club. It reminds me of the formally the process, at least for me, when I'm writing something and I hit a snag of research,
Right.
and I go down the rabbit hole in great detail
Yeah.
about the thing I'm researching,
Right.
that the form of those cytology chapters, or cetology, however you pronounce it,
Cytology.
reminds me very much of doing that and then returning to the narrative.
Yes, very much so. And I think I think that an editor now would say, like, get rid of those things that you're getting in the way of the story, but in fact they are, if you look at the world of the book the way I'm asking you to, they are really necessary to the narration of
Well,
the story.
He did it without Google.
Yeah, and they're another manifestation of obsession. Ahab's an obsession. That
That's
kind
so
of
beautiful.
research is an
Yeah.
obsession, and the act of writing a book is an obsession. So
and this book is completely that. Yes, absolutely. That's so great. There are two.
Yeah, two more than we got.
Yeah, just in reference to what was going on in Melville's world and in New England those times, I've always been distracted by Thoreau and why he did what
Right,
he did, and
right.
could walk to his mother's house for lunch if he wanted to.
Yeah.
So the geography of that has always interested me too. But I read a Thoreau biography a couple of years ago, and I guess it was 1858 when Darwin's Origin of Species was first printed.
Is that early?
Yes.
Wow.
And someone who lived in Connecticut was sent a copy by Darwin. and he brought it with him to Concord, and 8 of those men, Thoreau and Emerson and so on, sat up all night, New Year's Eve, and as a woman too, I'm going, and what were the women doing New Year's Eve? But it was New Year's Eve. They read it aloud to each other all night long.
That is such a movable idea.
I
And
know.
some of those men, the add-on a year or so later, was several of those men in that room had funded John Brown's raid.
Yeah.
And their names were on some list, and one of them actually ran to Canada for a couple of years because he was afraid he'd be arrested. So
Wow.
a lot of other stuff really was happening in his neighborhood
Yeah.
at that time.
That's so great. And yes, definitely. I mean, if you think of 1851 and what 1864 is going to be.
Yeah.
And certain things like, for example, maybe slavery is disappearing from the north, but you still have a responsibility if somebody's slave comes up north to send them back, and just, all kinds of odd, it's a particularly odd and vibrant
Time.
Yeah.
Just before, Nick, Darwin's Voyage of a Naturalist is in the extracts.
Yes.
So-
Okay. There you go.
I was just going to say that this is the fourth time I've read it. The first 2 times I was way too young, and this time, because I know the plot, I'm just enjoying all the relationships a lot more.
Yes.
And it kind of reminds me of I don't know if anyone watches the TV show Friday Night Lights, but like when you talk to people about it, it's not about football.
Right.
That's the backdrop. It's
Yeah.
about all these relationships in a small town.
Right.
And with this, it's like when you read it, the richness of it is not, do they get the whale or does the whale get them?
Right.
That's the A story, but it's not where the
Right.
real heart of the book is.
And yet, I think, going back to Renee's point, that the book is really about obsession, and the idea that to write the book you have to have the same level of obsession, and that kind of desire to know something you don't know and to prove that you know it in this particular way is so unique in the history of literature and language. It's such a beautiful book.
I would add that the people who enjoy reading the book enjoy a kind of obsession.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Like whether it's Wordle or spelling bee or
We all share those. Yeah. So it's funny. One of the people in our group said to me, "Well, this is my first time through Moby-Dick," and I said, "Well, you'll like it more the next time." And she said, "Oh, I'll never read it again." And I was like, "Oh, you will." You don't know it, because the first time is really just like the test run. So, thank you so much for coming.
But I have to say, does this mean that MFA programs aren't really necessary because people don't need to?
Well, there's a weird thing about the way that writing is taught, and I think for me personally, and I think for many of the writers who teach, who I really admire, you look at a piece of writing and you say, what does this want to be, rather than what is the clean way home. And I think when I was in school, maybe people were more teaching the clean way home, and
And it's evolved, and
yeah, and I think I'm not alone, in this. I think that the world of the MFA has changed.
yeah.
I hope.
Excellent. Well, Susie's absolutely right. You have to read it at least a half a dozen times to even start to begin to get what you want. And we have many people who have been to the marathon since 1983, and they have read the book, 20 times. So come and join us, okay, in June 9th to the 11th, and come to listen to Sina on Zoom and Paul, April 20th, 6 o'clock. You can sign up for the Zoom link on our website. And thank you all for your time. You can hang out and talk more with Susie about different aspects of it, but we appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much.